Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. I do appreciate you guys hanging out with us. I know there's so much going on right now in the world and we're all super busy, so we don't take it lightly that you've decided to spend the next 45 minutes to an hour with us. We have an excellent discussion lined up. Very excited for this one. I can see you all sort of trickling in now, but a lot of people registered for this one. And what we're going to be talking about is fueling explosive revenue growth with the kick-ass sales incentive program. So I don't know if listeners have been having this conversation, but certainly in my circles, a lot of people, you know, pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID have been talking about incentives, rewards, bonuses, that structure. How does it change? How does it adapt after all of this, during all of this? So we're going to kind of wrestle with some of that. Got a perfect panel to talk through it. And before I do introduce my awesome guests, super quick housekeeping. So number one, these are always recorded. So if you have to jump off for whatever reason, I know we're all working from home, so there's a slew of new problems that present themselves when you're working from home. So if you have to go, you got screaming kids in the background, you got to feed the dog, whatever it is, it's all good. We'll send this to you within 24 hours. And second, this is going to be kind of a roundtable discussion led by myself, but it's always way more fun when we do these, when the community gets really involved. So there is a chat feature at the bottom there. If you can introduce your name, title, you know, what company you're from, it's always cool to see who we're rocking with. And then if you have any questions, I'd love it if you guys guided this whole discussion and made my life easy. There's a Q&A section, so go to the Q&A. It is different than the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and any relevant questions that come out, I'll be kind of weaving in. So get involved. But now we got the boring stuff out of the way. I want to introduce my panelists. I am joined by Kevin, Graham, Brandon, and Greg. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
Happy to be here.
Excited to pick all your brains. And super quickly, we don't want to spend too much time here, but let's go around the horn and do what I call your superhero origin story. You all have really cool backgrounds. That's why you're on this panel. And Kevin, let's start with you, man.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin. I'm the co-founder and COO at Blueboard. Superhero. It's kind of hard to think about, but you know, I think a fun fact is I started Blueboard with my best friend who I've been playing basketball with since third grade. We were high school classmates, roommates after college, and you know, we started this after, you know, being frustrated in our first jobs, you know, getting gift cards and things like that. And so it's been a fun journey with a best friend, I'll tell you that.
Love it, man. You got tired of those $5 Starbucks gift cards? They just didn't do it for you anymore?
Yeah, no, they didn't do it. No, yeah.
Yeah, I know the feeling for sure. That's cool, man. It's always special when you get to like create stuff with your friends and close people around you. All right, moving around the horn. Graham, let's kick it off.
Yeah, so superhero story, it's pretty unconventional, I guess, right? I graduated with a political science degree. Took my LSAT, was going pre-law. And once I left that test, I realized how much I hated it and I did not want to do that. So I decided to dive headfirst into business and found an opening in a sales operations group with Vivint Smart Home out of Utah. Fell in love with it, was able to use a lot of my creative photography, videography, just general design to make our overall incentives look better, and realized that there was a lot of things that I loved with it. Had an opportunity to move over to Qualtrics and went from a sales org of 150, 200 to a global sales operation from here to India, Japan, all over. So it's been a wild ride, especially since half my time has been at home with Qualtrics and not in the office.
Very cool, man. Qualtrics, such a cool company, and the growth that you guys have seen is incredible. We share a bit of that story. I thought I was going to go into law for the longest time. Didn't make it quite as far as you did, but I think we both dodged a bullet there. Hopefully there's no no lawyers on the call. Brandon, over to you, man.
Yeah, so let's see, origin story. I didn't make the jump as early as Graham did, or yourself. I went into finance, corporate finance area, really focused on finance and analytics, spent some time at Concur, travel and expense management, and then Amazon. And so I'm a Pacific Northwest native, so I guess that's part of my origin story. Pretty much anything Seattle, and I'll talk to you for hours. My team gets sick of hearing about Seattle and the food, and like every Friday during the football season, I'm wearing my Seahawks jersey and stuff like that. And I think everyone gets sick of it, but that's me. And so then about 4 years ago, I made the jump down to Utah and worked at a couple companies, Qualtrics actually before this. And then now I run all of our revenue operations here at Lucid Software.
That's awesome, man. And I'm a Pacific Northwest guy myself, Vancouver, but I'm in Seattle all the time, man. So
Nice.
it's a good place when it's like this in summer and not raining and cloudy. But huge fan of Lucid as well. We've had Gabe via Mazar, Peter Chan on a ton at the Sales Hacker community. Love what you guys are doing. Last but definitely not least, Greg Macbeth. What's up, man? Welcome back, actually, to the Sales Hacker.
Thanks, Scott. Glad to be here. So my name is Greg Macbeth. I graduated with an engineering degree, but when I was in school, realized that I could make more money playing online poker than I could in an engineering job. So I parlayed that into a poker career in Vegas for a couple of years. Really enjoyed the psychology and the game theory and decision making, and eventually turned that into a sales career where I've spent the last 10 plus years. Started out at Cisco, and then most recently at AI startup Node, where I led the revenue organization for 3 years. And then this year I've been focused on my own work, working with early stage startups to help them grow revenue. So I started my own advisory firm, and that's how I'm here.
Cool, man. And for anyone listening, I want to hear a little bit more about that poker background. There's a webinar floating around somewhere, probably on the Sales Hacker YouTube channel, that we go deep into it. It's a cool story. All right, let's get into it. Before we get into the meat of this, gentlemen, let's quickly get kind of a pulse on how people are feeling about incentives, rewards, bonuses. So let's do a couple polls to kick it off, get people engaged. We'll launch the first one now. All right. So this is question being, who owns the budget for your sales incentives? We've got centralized team, decentralized, or other. And what we mean by this is it centralized, meaning your VP of sales or your CRO owns it and disperses it, or does each manager kind of own their own budget? That would be decentralized. And then other, maybe you've got a different version. Brandon, what do you think? I don't know if you can see the results, but if you can, close your eyes. What do you think it's going to be? Do you think it's more centralized or decentralized these days?
I just assume centralized, especially with COVID. I mean, just we're seeing it with customers as well as just internally, like budgets are getting kind of sucked up into centralized manner. So I'd be surprised if it's heavily decentralized right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna go with you on that one. I know Alyssa Merwin, the VP of sales at LinkedIn. I was talking to her the other day, and she says they're treating every single deal like the CFO signs off on it. So that's externally, but also internally. Everyone's, every dollar that's leaving is getting checked. And you're right. So 83%, it is around a centralized team. Only 12% is decentralized. 5% say other. Kevin, is that surprising to you at all?
No, yeah, especially for larger teams, you need to be more programmatic and kind of, just a little more designed, if you will, to kind of get the impact you're looking for.
All right, and we're going to do two more quick polls here. All right, so what behaviors are you incentivizing? Does it come from quota attainment, conversion install rate, timeline based, meaning, hit it this quarter, hit it this month, hit it by the end of the week, or other? You can go ahead and say that in chat. Graham, would love to hear your thoughts on where you predict we're going to lie with this one.
This is a tough one, right? COVID has made it a feast or famine type of environment. So I think people are going to turn away from, looking at maybe more good weather metrics like conversion and install rate, and move directly towards quota attainment, right? What are they bringing to the company's pockets that's helping maintain operations during this time? So that's probably where I'll put my guess.
I think you are probably right, and we'll stop that one. Yeah, you nailed it. So 60% is coming directly from quota attainment. 33% is the runner-up, which is timeline based, and then conversion installs on about 5%, 3% other. Greg, in your opinion, so those are the results. Is that the best way to do it? Just give them a carrot that is quota attainment and put all of your incentive behind that. Is there better ways of doing it, or is that the one you would suggest?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. I think the hardest part, as everyone's mentioned thus far, is just figuring out how pre-COVID numbers translate to the post-COVID world. So, presumably, in a lot of cases, your quota attainment or your quota targets are going to be driven by some sort of adjustment, given the pandemic. So I would expect that, with those adjustments being made, you're going to have a better sense of how those outcomes are going to look downstream. And therefore, that's going to be a better way to assess and support your team.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, moving on. We'll do one more poll, and then we are going to dive into it. All right, about how often you run sales incentives. Is this weekly, monthly, quarterly, almost never, or other? Kevin, where do you think people are going to fall? What are you seeing in the market these days?
I'm going to go with monthly or quarterly. And I know that's two answers, but I'm hedging myself.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. It's safe to do, and the market's pretty wild right now. You've got to have some hedges. All right, we'll stop it there. And you were correct. 37% say monthly, 29% quarterly, 27%. This is interesting. 27% say almost never. So they don't have any sort of kind of sales incentives. Brandon, is that how does that stack up with what you do at Lucid? Are you running them every month?
Yeah, excuse me. I mean, we try and run multiple at a time, but you have to make sure they're not overlapping. So we have like annual ones, things like obviously like club that many people have heard of, big trips, potentially like incentivizing a new product launch might be longer than, a traditional quarter, but that's more something that kind of sits in the background, not something that's front and center, like we're sending out promotional items. But yeah, like monthly is a cadence that we really try and stick to. Quarterly, if really needs be, but quarter's a hard time. It's hard to keep motivation and hype over a whole quarter in a sales incentive and a contest type thing. So we generally try and keep it to monthly. And then when needed, we can stretch, and then we'll always have those kind of longer programmatic things running over the top.
Yeah. I don't think personally I've ever been a part of an organization that I think overall we probably do the monthly, but you never really knew. Like no one has seemed to have like actually a routine around this stuff. At least the companies I've been a part of. But let's get into it. And true to form, we've got some good questions coming up already. I said I'd let you guys drive, so I'm gonna stick to it. There's a great question from Brian Nielsen. It says, given individual reps can have very different motivators, how varied and customized can we afford to make our sales incentive programs without falling prey to accusations of unfairness? Difficult question, kicking us off, Brian. Graham, do you want to try and wrestle with that one?
Yeah, sure. I have been in situations where I've watched it happen where it is unfair, and it totally is demoralizing to whatever group, right, is being marginalized there. I think within sales, the easiest way to one, understand what people want is to just ask them. So reach out to your sales groups, say, hey, well, what are you guys interested in? What motivates you? We found out, during Q4 of last year that people were super hyped about Peloton bikes. And so it was like strong motivator overall. It wasn't something that everyone wanted. And so I think the best approach that I found so far is to identify what the group likes, structure something surrounding it while being flexible to those that don't want it. So if somebody who does not want a Peloton wins, reach out to them, talk to them, see, hey, you don't want this, let's figure something else out. When it's too structured or rigid and reps don't feel like they have the ability to kind of move with it, you can lose a lot of motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything to add there, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I think Graham kind of nailed it on the head. Like, one of the things we're trying to do now is, instead of saying, hey, you win this incentive, you get a big screen TV, like you might already have 3, you don't need any more, right? Like you've won them already. Is having like a catalog, or, hey, you can pick from one of these different types of prizes. One of the things we found, especially at our company, we have a really diverse set of reps that are motivated by very different things. Some people just like really could care less about kind of materialistic type things, and would either prefer cold cash, or like are also very like environmentally active. So like a sub pod, a composting bin, like is actually really, really motivational for certain individuals. And so having like the choice of something that motivates you, we're starting to see some really, really good wins there, and not just like, you do this, you get this one prize, but instead you have like a catalog you can select from.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something there that I really like, is this idea of, call it conscious capitalism or something. You said people like recycling, helping the environment, and all these different things. That's a really cool way that I'm seeing a lot of people want to be rewarded, which is really cool kind of trend. And Kevin, this next question, I'm going to go to you, because you guys really are kind of the pros in this. Blueboard is the go-to rewards platform for sales incentives. So here's an interesting one from Jennifer. How are you handling the big things, i.e. like President's Club, when people can't travel right now? It's a big one.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are wrestling with this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, when people think about travel, like pre-COVID, they're thinking like, hey, we're going to take off and do like a week-long or 2-week-long trip in Bali, or I'm going to go on an African safari, right? Like, that international travel is not happening right now. And so what we've actually shifted a big focus to is kind of regional kind of like vacations, right? And so, I'm in the Bay Area, and I was just saying earlier in the call is, hey, I'm going to, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to take a week off and spend a week in Napa, right? I can drive to it. It's very controllable. I'm a little remote, right? I'm not kind of like packed into a city. And so we're seeing tons of, of our kind of customers, doing the road trips, doing the national park vacations, the staycations, right? Where you can drive to everything, right? People feel more in control of that. I think another thing too is that, with everyone kind of being inside, and then I think also, right, depending your risk level, right? You may not even feel comfortable doing something regionally. And so we're also seeing kind of a big influx of, what we're calling like our in-home options, where maybe somebody is, kind of trying to get back in shape, right? And having a Peloton, or maybe having like a virtual personal trainer, right? Or maybe they are trying to restart, learning Spanish, right? And so there's tons of these activities and hobbies that you can do in your home that we're seeing a lot of volume going to.
Mm-hmm. I like it. So don't think travel is totally off the table. There is, regional experiences you can do based on risk level, and then you can also bring in these in-home experiences. You can go see Greg over in Napa, who recently moved to Napa. Greg, I've got this question for you, and this is almost like a philosophical question. How do you know when you can afford sales incentives? This is from Ankita. What the dollars and cents? I think you could almost ask the opposite question. Like, how can you not afford to? But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that as a starting point, it's helpful to bake some sort of cost structure for the sales incentive program into your budget. So the earlier you can plan for that and understand how that motivates the team is really helpful. Now, assuming that that's not the case, it really helps to have a good handle on what metrics you can drive and what those lead to downstream. So, it's easy to think of, let's take a different example. So let's take a demand generation campaign. If you're going to invest money in demand gen, right, that's money up front, of course, just like a sales incentive program, but downstream, you assume that you're going to get some sort of positive ROI out of that. And if you thought through your metrics and you take a data-driven approach to what it takes in order to generate revenue, you can have a good idea as to what sort of outcomes can drive that result. And so if you have that confidence, and you know which levers to push, you can align your sales incentive program to ensure that even if you're investing money up front, which you may not think you have budget for, you're going to get an ROI from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. Brandon, how at Lucidchart do you kind of track the ROI of your incentive programs?
That's a great question. Well, I think one of the things too to take a step back is, and I like what you said, Greg, but making sure that your current comp program is like dialed in and buttoned up, right? I've seen too many examples where there's problems, and throwing incentives on top of that just like exacerbates all the problems. And so make sure you've really kind of dialed that in, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but that you have like a really clear foundation and kind of your variable comp and quotas are pretty dialed in. That said, like these programs and sales incentives, we leverage them a lot to, well, take for example, the annual comp plan. We build it in January, you have reps sign it, and effectively it's set for 12 months. Well, the incentives plans allow you to kind of test new things out, maybe take short-term focus as well. So some of the things that we've run contests on are around specific pushes with new products. To your point, I think Greg mentioned you'll have a big demand gen campaign. Well, wouldn't it be great if sales was just as incentivized to make sure that they're taking care of those, that, hey, on all this demand gen campaign around this new product, that you're going to get, a 1.25x accelerator on all those deals for the month of June while we're pushing a lot through. So they're incentivized to close because there's an end date of the of the contest. And we saw great success with this. We saw a lot of like really good pipeline generation and actually closing out some of these deals as a result of this short term. And so in answering your question about ROI though, it can be really difficult. It all depends on like what you're testing. In this example, we watched, we had the kind of before metrics, the during, and then kind of after. And that's really a great way to track ROI, is make sure you have your baseline and compare the baseline. And then you can literally look at, hey, what was the change? And that's generally as far as we go. I mean, you could literally go down into the weeds trying to calculate a perfect ROI, but you're just going to be layering upon assumption. So just trying to keep it simple. And I think most, even like all the way up to your CEO, should understand like, hey, yes, we could go to a perfect ROI, return on every dollar invested in the sales incentive, but it's just going to be, filled with assumptions. So really try and keep it simple has worked really well for us.
I like it. Identify the baseline, go from there. Graham, it looks like you got some thoughts there too.
Yeah, ROI in competitions or incentives is it's a really tricky conversation, right? You have seasonality, you have new hires, you have different environments that you're working in. For those statisticians, right? Like this is just omitted variable bias issue, like to the 1000th degree. You can't look at this solely based off of, the assumption that everything is going to be held the same. So when we look at it, much like Brandon was talking about, right? You keep it simple on the dollars end, but there's also a sales, morale piece to this that's actually really important as well. Do your sales reps feel motivated? Do they feel involved? Are they appreciative? Did they like the competition? Did it change their behaviors? After each competition that we run, we reach out in a survey and ask these questions, and we see if we hit the mark on the people aspect as much as we do on the metric aspect. More often than not, you can still take a win if you're maybe not quite where you wanted to be in one or the other, so long as both are trending in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a an interesting point. They can't just be down to dollars and cents. It's how do you quantify morale and your team members feeling good. Kevin, anything to add on top of that?
No, I love that. I love that, Graham, you're looking at kind of the people side. I think sometimes that can be like forgotten, but how do you quantify like a great sales culture? It's like hard to put a number on, but everyone knows it's invaluable, right? And so, yeah, I think that's something, it's just super important how you go about incentivizing people.
Mm-hmm. Sure. All right, I'm going to keep it rolling with these questions because they're well thought out. Sandro, thank you for the question. And Greg, I'm going to come at you with this one. So the conversation up till now has mainly been focused on individual incentives. What do you think of group/team incentives where coworkers will be able to experience something special together? It's a great question.
Yeah. So I'm actually a big fan of group incentives if done correctly. I think there's and especially, at more modern companies where there is a bit more of a sort of collective responsibility and especially if you have a team culture that's fairly well integrated, it's important to be able to have an incentive program where people feel motivated both as individuals and as groups. And I'd say it's a bit of a balance between the two, and it depends on the situation. So, one program that I often would run when I was at Node would be an individual incentive program, but if there was a team goal that was also hit, there'd be a bonus for everyone on top of that. So you allow people to sort of, manage that process in a way that ultimately drives the best outcome for the team, but also still benefits the individuals. I also think it depends on who we're talking about. So you can imagine that you might have a team, let's say a West Coast team and an East Coast team, and you can sort of pit those teams, against each other in a way that incentivizes the West Coast team as a group and the East Coast team as a group, but still sort of has that individual competition that drives bragging rights and obviously some sort of economic outcome. So I think, again, it depends a lot on what the structure of the organization looks like, what you're really trying to drive towards, and then, how you want to balance out both the individual and group motivators.
Yeah, I like it. And I'd love to get, Brandon, your thoughts there too. And I'll quickly play devil's advocate on the team thing, because I've seen it work effectively. I won't name the company, but I've seen it not work so effectively, pitting almost offices against each other, and can create some bitterness around, they get more inbound leads or their territories are easier and all these different factors. But Brandon, would love your thoughts on overall kind of team incentives.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ways you could do it. One, I think, candidly, I agree with Greg that pitting team against team can be really effective if done correctly. I also think you need to hit a certain scale to be able to do it, because it becomes almost impossible to create if you have your enterprise reps competing against your SMB reps, like it's just apples and oranges. It's really hard to make a contest that like isn't favoring one group or the other. So you need to make sure there's like enough teams to where you can compete on kind of same playing fields, right? And then just how you roll it out is really important. Second, there's also these contests. We ran one at the end of last year. We really wanted to have a strong Q4 push, and we called it the Pot of Gold. And I think similar to, I don't remember if it was Graham or Greg had mentioned this, but basically what happened is when you hit your number, you moved into your like traditional accelerator plan. But when your team hit your number, Greg had mentioned this, you got an additional kicker. And then when your division hit the number, you got an additional kicker. And so it really incentivized reps. I mean, we had some great stories as well as pictures of, you had like literally enterprise reps down with some of our SMB reps dialing at like 10 o'clock on December 31st. And it really, I think, created a great camaraderie. I mean, I don't think they were actually all that motivated by the specific spiff, but it just like really drove the right behavior of, hey, we're all in this together. And yeah, it's great if you are successful, but if the whole team or company or org isn't, it's just not as good. It's just not as successful. So those are other ones where you don't have to like be against each other. You can actually just drive a really collaboration, and everyone wins. Everyone can win. I mean, that becomes really tricky, and you have to do really good planning up front to make sure you have the right amount of budget and all those types of things. But generally speaking, that was really successful for us.
Yeah, I like it. All right, I want to shift gears a little bit, and we'll get back to some of these questions. But I do want to, really dive into what you're doing each individual internally. We've got Lucid, Qualtrics, incredible companies. What role do sales incentives play in your revenue strategy currently at Qualtrics? And Graham, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so currently at Qualtrics, our quotas are set for the year. The books are already made, the books of business for our reps, before we start the year. And we assume we're going to run into challenges. We're going to run into changing environments. And so what we like to use sales incentives for, and actually, I think it's important to mention what we don't use them for as well. We'll take breaks from competition so that we don't have competition fatigue, so people stop caring about it, right? Equally as important as running a good competition. But what my position does specifically is to meet with each sales leader. So from North America, South America, Europe, Middle East and Africa, Australia, Pacific, Japan. I meet with each of these sales leaders from the enterprise, account executive, sales development, each level, to determine what their areas of weakness are so that we can target that with a behavior that will improve that metric. Every group is different. So before I joined Qualtrics, there were still competitions, of course, and they were great, they were healthy, but they're more centralized. Global account executives, global enterprise, right? And this doesn't account for the fact that North America has been around a lot longer for us than our Australia, Pacific, Japan. And so the first thing I did when I joined was to begin to separate it out to get more peer-to-peer competition, to allow those sales leaders to actually target the metrics that are most meaningful for their business. I hold the belief that each sales leader really does own their part of that business, and you need to give them full autonomy to help them drive towards that. So we identify those weaknesses, or if we just really want to pump something crazy, we have a unique seasonality that we hold to, and so it's important that you keep that in mind as well. But at the end of the day, we're assessing areas in the business that could be better and trying to put the appropriate things in place. I'm really lucky to have a role that's specialized to this, so I can spend a full quarter planning 18 separate competitions globally, and they're tailor fit down to the metric to do so. That's a privilege. I don't think that that's very common, and we're I'm grateful for that, obviously, right? But when you're able to spend that time doing it, you can drive some pretty incredible results where, the night before the end of the quarter, you've got, my inbox is like 700 emails deep, and I'm trying to rush through all of them to make sure the approvals have gone through. And the competitions program or the incentives program is meant as a tool to help a challenging environment throughout the year, as well as improve morale as a whole. Short answer and long answer.
I love it. Well, must be fascinating to be just so unbelievably immersed in this topic. One thing I kind of teased out there or heard there was kind of the importance of, creating competition, but creating it with a level playing field, right? Making sure that it's always kind of fair. What are some other things? So make sure it's fair. I think, no one wants to play a game when the other side has a leg up. What are some other learnings you've had from creating just, hundreds and hundreds of these competitive environments?
I think simplicity is king in all things. So I work on a team with analysts. I have a strong statistics background myself. I could make some totally badass competitions that would make sense and really drive business, and it would be just the most difficult thing to understand, right? Because I'm going to employ too many metrics, too many things to do. You have to keep it very simple with what the reps need to understand to achieve, right? At each quarter, I run the risk of shooting an email out and someone might not read it at all for the competition, right? So you have a good kickoff, you have good understanding. Your metrics are simple to understand. Reporting needs to be crisp, right? Reps need to have trust in it. They need to understand that if they look at where they're seated, that it's correct, and that you do that beforehand. Basically, you have to look at the reps as a customer. And if you're not meeting their needs as a customer, just like any other business, you're not going to get the desired behavior, even though you could set up a perfect incentive. You need to roll it out correctly. You need to have simple communication and often communication. Shouting out wins every week. Hey, so-and-so's doing great. Step it up. It's obviously going to be tailored to your group and your organization, but if I had to say there were three things that matter, it's simplicity and metrics, over communicate your wins, and develop trust with your sales reps. Probably the three things.
And I just to add to that, I think the over communicate wins is just super critical. And I also think it's important, while you can have over communication from someone like Graham, it's that like organic communication that really drives it. Like one of the things we find, and why I struggle ever thinking of moving away from club, is that month or two after they come back from just a really great trip does so much for the organization. They're talking about, hey, like, let me show you my pictures, and like, let me tell you about how great it was to spend time with our COO and president and things like that. That is really powerful, right? Like, sure, we can send out like a pamphlet and things like that, and that helps, right? But if it's not dovetailed with like really this kind of grassroots communication, it falls, I think, pretty short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. Fair, simple, constant communication, and celebrate those wins as much as possible, and find environments to get that organic conversation started. All right, Greg, I'm going to go to you on this next question. Okay, so sales incentives, all these are awesome, but how do I determine which selling activities and metrics that I should even be incentivizing?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what's going to drive the goals and the KPIs that matter to you. So if you're designing a sales incentive program, I presume it's either because that's part of your corporate ethos, and you believe that's an effective way to lead a sales organization, as you see all these gentlemen talk about today, and or it might be that you're falling short in some particular area. And so you want to make sure that you can incentivize your team to drive forward in that shortcoming. So I think understanding where you're falling short is important, and then also understanding what are the things that are driving that shortcoming. So if you have specific leading indicators that are ultimately impacting your bottom line, it's helpful to understand those and see where you might have an opportunity to create an incentive program that improves those numbers. Now, I think Brandon talked about this a little bit earlier. Understanding how metrics take flight in a particular time frame is really important. You don't want to have a program that lasts for so long that people forget what they're doing. It also needs to be, as Graham mentioned, incredibly concise to the people that are part of the program. If you have to explain it 10 different ways, it's going to be really complicated. I remember a personal experience where at one of the first companies I worked with in a sales capacity, we had an incentive program, and I sat down with my team after the end of the year, and not a single one of us could figure out how to calculate our take home. And so if you have a sales incentive program that has those same characteristics, you're not going to be motivating the team to drive those right activities. So you need to consider all of those things in tandem. And then lastly, I would say that, is what you're incentivizing subject to some particularly bad outcome? If you, let's say you incentivize, a simplistic example would be incentivize the number of emails that someone sends. Right? It's very easy to understand how that could go awry, but there are a lot more subtle variations upon certain metrics that could still drive poor behavior or things that ultimately don't behoove the company or the customers. So you need to consider all those things in tandem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kevin, anything to add on top of that? I thought it was a great answer.
Yeah, I know, a great answer. I'll provide like some examples of how we do things. On sales development side, like Blueboard has a pretty big addressable market in terms of industry, and so we tend to focus incentives opportunistically where we're seeing growth, right? And so right now, this quarter's incentive is really about driving conversations, connects with a couple industries that we think are really resilient in our market segment. And so on sales development side, it's very more opportunistic. On the AE side, it's more like frequency based. So what I mean by that is, doing the right things. We've been really focused on making sure that we are connecting with kind of the ultimate decision maker, kind of navigating to power is what we call it. And so we are basically having an incentive around the number of times you actually get in front of the CHRO at a company or the CRO, right? And it's just kind of spurring this, we're tracking that metric, and then what the AEs are actually doing is like kind of thinking collaboratively on like, hey, the different tactics that are helping them do that. And so it's been cool of like, it's individual, but people tend to like, you know, they're being more collaborative in how they're going about it, which is interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I'll go back to you on this one because you guys have such a good lens on this. What is your take on experiential rewards versus, you know, just straight up just giving more cash or gift cards? What are you seeing kind of in the market and with your customers?
Yeah, I'm probably slightly biased because we started a company from getting too much gift cards. But, you know, I think, you know, when I think of, you know, what makes a great reward, right, it's got a couple of things, right? One, it's marketable. And then two, it's remembered, right? And you can look at this in a couple of ways, right? When you roll out the program, right, is it creating excitement? Is it creating enthusiasm, right? Is it, is it marketable, right? From a programmatic perspective, right? The second piece, you know, kind of in the process, right? Are the reps actually remembering the reward? Is it top of mind for them, right? Are they remembering the reward? Are they remembering the competition, right? Because if they don't remember, then, you know, it's really of no use, right? Once somebody gets rewarded, right, how do they feel, right? Graham talked about this feeling of value, of appreciation, right? One of the things that we say is, hey, when, you know, a year out or 2 years out, when they're like, hey, what was the most memorable like incentive or thank you? We want them to say, oh, it was that Blueboard experience that my manager gave to me, right? And so that idea of remembering of recall value is really important. And then the last step, which is also marketable, right? It's something that Brandon talked about, is once somebody is getting rewarded, once reps are getting rewarded, right? How does that create this like organic buzz, right? How is it shareable internally, right? And not forced, right? But like, are people talking about it? Are people excited to share it, right? And so that's something that you hear a lot about Club, right? Is, you know, the couple months after, there's like this, what we call like this kind of afterglow in the organization, right? Where the reps who went, right, are super pumped that they, you know, they got to connect with each other. The reps who didn't are a little jealous, right? They're both trying to vibe like, I want to go next year, right? That's a great reward. Yeah. And so I think, you know, kind of to break it down, we've kind of like, you know, we position and we think experiences are able to do kind of all four of those things. Yeah.
Okay. And Graham, in your experience, you run so many of these things. When you do experiential versus cash, what are the end results? Which ones do you typically find more effective?
Obviously, right, in an environment where it's possible. I love experience-oriented things because, and it's hard to, right? I'm an advocate of flexibility when it comes to rewarding, right? Someone put in the effort, they should have a little bit more of say. But when it comes to experiences, I think about some that I've been gifted myself, right? You know, you get a $500, $1,000 check in the mail. Congrats, you won your sales incentive. Oh, you know, also the mortgage is coming up. The water bill's here. I wanted to finish the back year. Like, it's so easy for that cash to turn into something maintenance oriented for you. When you're forced in a good way to like go do an experience, you know, we live near Park City in Utah. It's a gorgeous place, you know, known for its Sundance Film Festival, skiing, whatever have you. I think back to when we were gifted an experience for outperforming in a quarter, and wife and I got to go spend time before we had kids, and it was really memorable. I loved it. It was such a great trip, and I could have taken that and I could have done the car payment. I could have done something else and it would have been effective, but reps want a culture in their sales organization that feels like the management and the organization is invested in them as people, and providing experiences helps them feel like there's that value there, that they want me to go experience something fun. Like, oh man, at Qualtrics, we do all of these things and it's incredible. Like, that's what you're trying to drive at the end of the day, is a culture as well.
I like that. Culture piece is so huge. All right, go back to some of these great community questions. Lots of people interested in this topic, that's for sure. All right, here's an interesting one. Where did it go? Okay, Brandon, I'll go with you, and then Greg, I'll get your thoughts on this. What is the panel's thoughts on having the prize, so your incentive, be a double up of leads for a month instead of a monetary or product prize? Kind of sketchy territory. It's like the rich get richer kind of mentality almost.
I mean, it all depends on your business model. Like, right, we're a very territorialized like account deployment. So I couldn't necessarily, it wouldn't work in our model. Like I couldn't take a lead from my territory and give it to Greg or vice versa, because then it just break our whole territory deployment. But if you're not in one of those worlds, I actually think it's a really creative thing. It could be a great way to, you know, both save some money and drive some excitement. I mean, reps love like unique things. I mean, that's where I think, like to Graham's point around the experience, that's why I think experiences are having a lot of impact, because it's not your everyday thing. And if you all of a sudden get a bunch more leads, that's pretty exciting. If it were, that was the way you constantly rewarded things, I think then it would actually fall flat on its face. But if it's something that you throw into the mix, I think it's great. Like, so I'm a big proponent of it if your model allows it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add a caveat to that. I'm maybe a little more hesitant to go forward with that model. I think it would require, to Brandon's point, a really well-suited organizational structure and revenue generation model in order to support that. You'd also have to consider what you would do to keep from a runaway rich get richer effect. So you could easily imagine a feedback loop in which it effectively starves everyone else out. So, you know, I would say as a default, I personally would probably shy away from that strategy. And it would really require all of the right elements in place before I would consider it.
Yeah. Graham, have you ever experimented with this? Or Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it would, and that's a great point too. Like in my mind, I'm a big proponent of it. If you have like a new lead source, right? If you're running a new campaign, but I'm having to like, what is it, rob Paul to pay Peter or something like that. If I'm having to take leads from others that didn't win in order to like fund effectively the winners, like that to me seems detrimental. But you know, a lot of times you can align it with a new marketing campaign where you're expecting a big burst in leads and things like that to where it doesn't have that impact. But yeah, that's a great call out, Greg.
Graham, have you ever experimented with any sort of something like that, where it's basically you're rewarded with good performance by getting a leg up to keep the momentum going?
I actually haven't. I'm a little cautious of it. If the purpose of an incentive is to change behavior to do something, my perspective is you're really actually focused on the middle of the pack, right? Sales incentives that are catered towards the top 1% usually fail, and they usually are, you know, self-satisfying, and those same group of people always win, and people are like, oh, I don't care about this. You can get the most lift out of that middle, and so you try and find that equitable metric that really can help. But when it comes to creative rewards and stuff, all for that, right? Like this quarter, you know, you have to, each group's different. Our enterprise group does not care about $500 rewards, right? So we're looking at like stock options for prizes, which is super unique, or executive lunches, things that have maybe less monetary value and more intrinsic value to them. You just have to really think about your group and think, okay, what matters most to them? It could be leads for one group, but I would actually maybe challenge you and say there's maybe something better suited for that group somewhere.
I like that. The stock options ones for sure. All right, here's another great question from Sandra again. Kevin, I'll go with you on this one. I think it's a great question. Obviously, sales teams do not only consist of reps who directly participate in generating revenue. There are also background teams such as sales ops, sales enablement. What is your opinion on creating incentives for these teams? Is it even possible to measure their success/development in a similar manner? You have clients, people you work with that are outside of kind of immediate sales reps?
Yeah, definitely. And so we actually started Blueboard selling more to HR. And so using Blueboard as like a company-wide recognition program, I think kind of when you think of, kind of the supporting groups, traditionally, probably the pushback was, hey, like, it's not as objective as an SDR or an AE. Like, how do we kind of like incentivize and motivate behaviors with these groups? I think one could be project based with the sales ops team. And so maybe like there's a big overhaul in a sales incentive strategy or a system, right? And so an incentive could be project based. I think another thing, with these groups is more like peer recognition, right? And so what I mean by that is less like, hey, dangling the carrot. If you do this, then you get that. It's more of like, hey, like recognizing the great work and allocating budget. So, a head of sales ops could recognize the team when they're doing good work, right? And so I actually think like implementing a recognition program versus an incentive program for supporting groups would be probably the better fit.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Recognition, maybe have your team vote on, the most helpful teammate or something along those lines.
Yeah, it could be like a peer nominated program where like, your peers are kind of nominating each other. It could be a spot program where like, the leader just, has a discretionary budget and they could reward and recognize somebody as they see kind of behavior that warrants it. Right. So it depends. It could be both kind of structured, bottoms up or top down. We see both.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. As we've got about 5 minutes left here, I want to get to this question. And Greg, I think I'm going to start with you here is, when you work with companies, you advise for, multiple companies, who do you need to get involved when designing a sales incentive program? Obviously, people like Graham exist, but not every company is lucky, like Qualtrics, to have someone dedicated full-time to this. Who do you need to pull into the room in your eyes?
Yeah, well, I think ideally you get multiple levels of the organization engaged because any successful sales incentive program is going to require a few things. It's going to require somebody to spearhead and sponsor this. It's going to require budget to be allocated. It's going to require someone to operationally manage the process. It's going to require someone to communicate. And then it's going to require buy-in. Obviously, if people aren't participating emotionally, it's not going to be a successful program. So I think the more levels the organization can get bought in on some level, it's really helpful. And that's one reason I think it's really important for senior executives to set the tone that incentivizing the team in different, unique, and personalized ways is really critical to a high functioning organization. Once you've gotten that buy-in, I think it really depends on the structure of the organization and who you're trying to incentivize. I'm a firm believer that any sales incentive program should involve the people who are going to be directly impacted, making sure that they feel like they have a good stranglehold on what's going to be required to be successful, how they can impact those metrics, and what those metrics are ultimately going to do to drive success downstream for the organization. And I think it's also really important that those frontline managers are also engaged. They need to know how to support the team effectively and make that team feel like that whatever they are driving towards, right, that they've got the backing of the people that can help make their lives easier, right, or bring resources to bear to help them achieve those outcomes. So I think beyond, if it's obviously great if you have somebody like Graham in your organization, but I think that you can still run a successful program if you have buy-in at other levels.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Some great points there. Brandon, who do you usually get in the room when you're designing a new sales incentive program?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with Greg. Like, we have all of our VPs and directors, and we'll generally say, what are some behaviors where we have some ideas, they have ideas. We then kind of take it back, build a program, and then run it by them. And that's helped a ton because they're involved in the design. They're really bought in. And so that's kind of one piece on that. Another piece that we've done that I think is really impactful for kind of smaller companies that are growing is leveraging those assets as well. Like, we give each of our division leads a budget for running spiffs within their team and contests within their team. We make sure that we coordinate so they're not running one in parallel with something like a broader one, but it has really allowed us, like from myself and like my team, to really multiply our impact with spiffs. And then the managers can, and managers and division leaders can really focus on what they need. So they can literally do like day-long power hour contests. They can do, really short-term focused things, as well as even broader things. I thought one of the coolest contests our VP of the enterprise team ran was they had it was a quarter-long incentive, but each week had a contest. And at the end of each week, they would get like, we called it Lucid Bucks. He had like gone to like Kinko's and printed our president's face on these like little dollar bills. It sounds kind of cheesy, and they had a big auction at the end. And it was a ton of fun. But each week he focused on they had like a training as well as then a contest that aligned with each training. And like, there's no way myself and my team would have bandwidth to do like a customized program with every single division. And so it's a really great way for, small operation teams to really extend their reach and help kind of build up a program without having to, have a Graham or, someone that this is literally all they do, because it can become, Graham can probably attest to this. It is a lot of work. And when you're talking about money and incentives, like I remember I used to run the reporting for Club at Qualtrics, and my inbox was just inundated with questions of, well, what about this? What about this? And so you have to be prepared for that. And nothing's worse than if you roll out a program and you like aren't responsive and you're not, and you can't like really run it to the full extent. It's almost, I don't want to say it's worse, but it's not nearly as effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. So have it sounds like you have that centralized plan, but also allow for kind of fluidity, creativity within each team as well. Graham, when do you bring a Graham on board in your eyes? At what scale?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Whenever my boss thought that was the right move. So at Vivint Smart Home, when I was there, smaller team, it's really easy to kind of keep everything, just in the sales leader's hands. But moving to Qualtrics, 1,000+ sales reps, variety of different sales experience and levels between those reps. I think once you're a global operation and you need someone who can basically solely take that, manage budget, reporting, analytics, communication, marketing and design, fulfillment. If you basically just want someone to do everything and you can kind of turn away and look away, do your job doing something else. And then at the end of quarter, basically take stock of what happened. I provide ROI analyses at the end of each quarter of, hey, here's how it went, wins, losses. When you want things more automated is probably a good look, but Qualtrics is moving into the $1 billion space of new revenue each year. And so maybe that's a good level. Couldn't tell you exactly though, maybe a little too challenging.
Awesome. All right. Well, gentlemen, that takes us to our time. If this is something that is, top of mind, you're listening to this, like, hey, we need to get on top of this. Now more than ever, with so much going on in the world, it's harder to do President's Club, harder to do SKOs. So do check out things like Blueboard. They're really changing the game for these sales incentives. And thank you, of course, to Blueboard for sponsoring this. And huge thank you to Greg, Brandon, Kevin, Graham. Thanks for the time, guys. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
And thank you all for joining us. Great questions throughout. You guys rock.